Chaco and Sid of the Winged Horde. Chaco is an ill-disciplined, mischievous brat, and Sid is a rather eccentric man that loves nothing more than scaring children, particularly Chaco. These two characters didn't have much of a backstory in Suikoden 2, but their backstory was explored in a short story titled Under the Mask, which was included in the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 4, a book that released in Japan in June 2002. This short story takes place 1 year before the events of Suikoden 2, and it centers around the Spirit Festival, which was a festival of ancestral worship held by the Winged Horde to remember their dead. While the story focuses more on Chaco than it does Sid, it really fleshes out Sid as a character, and it gives us a better look at who Sid is as a person and why he behaves the way he does. The story begins in the spring of the solar year 459 as the children of the Winged Horde are playing a game of football, soccer for you Americans. Fishing nets were tied between two trees on either end of the field and the lines were marked with chalk. Two teams of 5 children competed against one another as the children who were too young to compete watched from the sidelines. The young children spectating the game cheered in excitement as the ball moved from one side of the field to the other, and a particularly loud cheer could be heard when Chaco stole the ball from a much taller, older boy. Chaco began running with the ball, but 3 kids from the other team blocked his path. He feigned moving his body left and right, looking for an opening in their defense. With their defense standing firm and no opening appearing, Chaco launched the ball up into the air over their heads, and with the 3 kids distracted looking at the ball, Chaco began flapping his wings, flying into the air and gripping the ball with his clawed feet. His opponents began flapping their wings in an attempt to catch him, but before they could reach him, he released the ball and kicked it into the back of their net. Chaco would go on to score 3 more goals during the game, leading his team to victory. At the end of the game, his teammates and opponents came together, patting him on the back for a great performance. Unbeknownst to the children, Sid had been hiding amongst the trees watching them play. The children, who were all laughing and joking only moments ago, suddenly looked terrified. Chaco felt a shiver run down his spine and turned around fearfully. As he turned around, Sid called out his name in a creepy voice. Chaco screamed in terror as if he'd seen a ghost. He then broke a branch off a nearby tree and began swinging it violently at Sid in an attempt to drive him away. Sid began laughing and asked the children if they wanted to hear a story. They all shook their heads frantically as if to say no. Sid grinned and told the children that this is his scariest story yet as he grabbed Chaco by the shoulders. Sid told the children that it happened last night in the graveyard of the town across the river, which was covered in blood. The children all screamed, flapping their wings and dispersing in every direction. Chaco shook himself free and flew into the sky. Sid creepily called out his name as he flew after him. Sid muttered to himself in disappointment. The story left him afraid to go to the bathroom alone after midnight, and he wanted to share it with the children to scare them too. After escaping from Sid, Chaco landed on the roof of his grandmother Suzu's house. Suzu was highly respected by the Winged Horde and considered to be the wisest member of their village. Suzu was Chaco's favourite grandparent, and he would often listen to her stories while she smoked her pipe, though he hated the smoke. Chaco's father, Rainy, was Suzu's second son. 15 years ago, when he was 21, he fell in love with a fellow winger called Marnie, who was 2 years younger than him. The two got married and eventually had a son, Chaco, who resembled his mother. As Chaco landed on the roof of his grandmother's house, he bumped into his mother Marnie, causing her to drop the water she was carrying to water Suzu's spinach seedlings. Chaco asked his mother how his grandparents were doing. Chaco's uncle, Suzu's eldest son, Phobo, had died from an illness earlier that year, having never gotten married or had children, which devastated his grandparents and left them depressed. Chaco could hear his grandparents and his father speaking inside the house as he offered to help his mother water the spinach. As they were making their way into the house, he asked his mother if Sid has always been the way he is. Marnie asked him what he meant, and Chaco explained that Sid is always scaring the kids and they're all terrified of him, but he didn't tell her that he was also one of the scared kids. Chaco wasn't afraid of earthquakes or thunderstorms, but ghost stories scared him to death. Marnie replied that she's sure Sid is just looking out for them in his own way. Many adults in the village felt the same way about Sid. Marnie explained to Chaco that Sid used to come over and play with him when he was a baby, and that Sid often took care of him whenever she and his grandparents were busy. She also told Chaco that Sid was there while he was learning to walk and fly, and that he's such a nice boy. Chaco muttered, "That's what you think," and that he scares people. Marnie responded by telling him that Sid isn't a bad person. She then asked Chaco if he remembered the ball he had when he was younger. The children of the village all shared a single ball, and the younger children rarely ever got a chance to play with it, as the older children were always playing with it. Sid saw how much Chaco wanted a ball of his own, so he went around the village collecting pieces of leather from the villagers and stitched together a ball for Chaco with his own hands. While Sid would sometimes gather the children from the village and tell them old tales and spooky stories, many of the adults in the village saw this as Sid's way of looking out for the children while befriending and toughening them up, though he also got amusement out of scaring the children. And that's the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 takes place a few months later during the summer. The villagers were busy preparing for the Spirit Festival, an annual 3-day festival for honouring the spirits of the dead. In Winged Horde belief, the spirits of the dead return to their ancestral home in the Tinto Mountains. During the Spirit Festival, it's believed that the boundary between the living and the dead becomes blurred, and that the ancestral spirits visit their descendants in Two River to temporarily dwell among the living. The villagers celebrate this festival through song and dance, by performing music and by offering food to their ancestor spirits. When burying their dead, it was customary to place a mask on the deceased that depicts the face of the sacred beast that protects their people. During the festival, adult men wear these masks in imitation of the dead. The villagers gathered at Suzu's house to plan the festival in detail. As the Great Wing, which is the Winged Horde's rank for elder or chieftain, it was up to Suzu to manage the festival. However, it was her son Rainy, who had the rank of Son of the Wing, who did most of the work. One by one, Suzu and Rainy assigned all of the villagers their roles for the festival. Marnie then asked Mules, who served as the host of the village's festivals, if the masked men had been chosen for the Trail of Courage. On the second day of the festival, a ceremony is prepared for children under the age of 16 called the Trail of Courage. Children have to travel through the forest at night to retrieve a trinket from a tree before returning to the village. During this ceremony, several adult men are secretly assigned to wear ghastly outfits and masks to scare the children in the forest. This ceremony serves as a test of courage to prepare the children for adulthood. Mules responded by saying that he has 5 people to fulfill the role, but he's currently looking for more, and he then asked for volunteers. Several young men enthusiastically stepped forward. One of the men nudged Sid and encouraged him to volunteer too. Sid smirked and stepped forward. One of the men then commented that they should torment the children and make them wet themselves. The young volunteers all burst out laughing at his comments. The children had no way of knowing who the masked men were, and it was forbidden for them to reveal their identities to the children. Because of this, some children failed the Trail of Courage every year when they ran out of the forest crying after swearing they saw a spirit. The young men were eagerly looking forward to their turn to scare the life out of the children, just as they had been scared when they were kids. On the first night of the festival, a bonfire was made at the entrance of the village to guide the ancestors' spirits home to the village. Those who died during the past year were called New Souls, and a special altar was set up for them for the villagers to leave flowers and other offerings. Chaco's uncle Phobo was one of those who passed during the last year. Chaco picked flowers from the forest earlier that morning to leave as an offering to his uncle. As he laid the flowers at the altar, he looked up at the sky and said, "Uncle, I wonder if you'll find your way back." Marnie, who was standing beside Chaco, responded that she's sure he will. Rainy chimed in by saying that he'd build up the bonfire to make sure that Phobo doesn't get lost, as he placed his brother's favourite white flower at the altar. Chaco looked down in sadness as he muttered that he wants to see his uncle again. The story then cuts back to Chaco's childhood memories. When Chaco was much younger, he had no concept of life and death, but Sid tried explaining it to him in his usually scary way. He told Chaco that when someone dies, they're placed in a coffin and buried in a grave, and they never get to see their family again. He then locked Chaco in a coffin. Chaco cried in the coffin, but soon his tears turned to loneliness as he remembered the first time he encountered death. It was when his dog died. Chaco was always scared of ghosts, but when he had his dog by his side, he never felt afraid. It then cuts back to the festival. Men of the village wore cloaks made from leaves, along with masks of sacred animals, while they paraded through the village in silence. Elderly and middle-aged men played music. They beat small drums and played flutes that were made of reeds that grow by the river. The melody that was played had been passed down among the Winged Horde for generations. It had a soothing tune, and those who heard it felt solemn. Men and women of all ages gathered around the bonfire. They drank and danced around the bonfire, keeping it burning throughout the night. On the evening of the second day, the men selected to scare the children during the Trail of Courage had begun gathering in the forest. Mules reminded them of the rules. The men are forbidden from speaking in the forest while wearing their masks and are not allowed to fly. The men nodded their heads in obedience. The men put on their creepy masks and silently crept into the forest in search of good hiding spots to scare the children. Sid hid behind a large, ominous tree like a hunter waiting for his prey. He heard a small set of footprints approach, and waiting for the perfect time, he leapt out from behind the tree and yelled, "Boo!" A girl, around 10 years old, screamed in terror and ran away. Sid excitedly started grinning at how easy it was to scare the children, but he had violated the rules of the ritual by speaking with his mask on. Next, a boy slightly younger than Chaco approached. Sid once again leapt out from behind the tree, spookily saying, "Ooh." Sid started laughing as the boy ran away in fear. The younger generation of wingers didn't believe that their ancestors' spirits actually returned during the festival, and Sid didn't believe it either. That's why he didn't think it was such a big deal to break the rules by speaking with his mask on. One by one, the children approached Sid's location, and one by one he scared them all away. At first, Sid was having a lot of fun, but he was growing more and more bored as the night went on. The children were often scared before Sid even got to speak, and they reacted in the same way as when he told them scary stories. Sid started muttering to himself, wondering what's up with them and why they keep running away. At that moment, Sid heard a voice coming from behind him. It was a flat, hollow voice, stripped of all emotion. Sid felt a chill and turned around. He saw a man floating in the sky, wearing a strange mask that he'd never seen before. The man descended slowly without flapping his wings. Sid could see the grove behind him, as if the man was translucent. Sid opened his mouth to speak, but his throat dried up and no sound came out. Even if he could speak, he didn't know what to say. The man removed his mask, but instead of a terrifying form of the dead that Sid feared it might be, there was only darkness where a face should be, yet the rest of his body remained translucent. The mysterious man told Sid not to scare the children too much. The voice felt familiar to Sid, but he couldn't recall who it belonged to. Sid felt the energy being drained from his body as Chapter 2 comes to an end. Chapter 3 opens with Chaco waiting at the entrance to the forest with the other children for their turn to enter. Not long after the first group of children entered the forest, Chaco heard high-pitched screams coming from within, followed by the frightened children rushing out of the forest. The 10-year-old girl that Sid had frightened came running out of the forest trembling in fear. She told everyone that a real masked man threatened her in a creepy voice. Chaco didn't believe her. The next group of children entered the forest, but they too came running out, trembling in fear, repeating the girl's claims that a real masked man attacked and threatened them. The third group entered, but they also came running out in fear, each one of them insisting that a real masked man appeared while flying in the sky and threatening them. Chaco called them a bunch of wimps. A girl sitting next to Chaco laughed and pointed out that his knees were shaking in fear, but Chaco called her a liar. Finally, it was Chaco's turn. Chaco entered the forest along with 2 other boys and 2 girls. The 5 children were on high alert after hearing the stories of the other children. As they delved deeper into the forest, they heard a rustling noise coming from a nearby bush. A masked man rose up from the bush without saying a word. The children stood frozen in fear until the man slowly sunk back into the bush. Chaco urged the group to move on, but the 2 girls in quivering, fearful voices said they wanted to go home and ran out of the forest. Chaco and the 2 boys ventured deeper into the forest. More masked men appeared trying to scare them, but the boys pressed on. It had been a while since a masked man appeared, and Chaco thought they were close to their destination. All of a sudden, a masked man wearing an eerie mask appeared in front of them and began flapping its wings to block their path. The fear the boys had been suppressing up until that moment suddenly exploded and they scattered while screaming as loud as they could. Before Chaco even knew what happened, he was all alone deep in the forest with only a narrow path in front of him. Chaco remembered his father's words to not allow the masked men to see your fear, as fear empowers them. Chaco then decided that he had no choice but to press on. Eventually, Chaco reached a large tree with a small bonfire lit beside it. Realizing this had to be his destination, Chaco excitedly ran towards the tree. A small stand had been placed by the tree with a wooden box on it. Inside the box were vials containing a purple liquid which were considered to be good luck in Winger culture. Chaco thought this must be the token of proof for completing the trial and put one of the vials in his pocket. Just then, he heard the sound of wings flapping overhead. Chaco looked up and a masked man descended in front of him. The masked man was different from all of the others he had seen so far. It didn't have the face of a monster and it didn't make any scary noises or threats like the other children claimed. Instead, the man was wearing a mask of the sacred beast that protects the Winged Horde. Chaco, who had been scared the entire time he was in the forest, no longer felt afraid. He wondered who or what was behind the mask. He noticed the man's hair was the same shade of black as his father's. In an uncertain but hopeful voice, Chaco called out, "Uncle Phobo?" At that very moment, the mask fell off the man's face, seemingly by its own accord. Phobo's face emerged from beneath the mask with a peaceful expression and a warm smile. Chaco reached out his hand, thinking Phobo was still alive, but all his hand touched was air. Chaco asked Phobo if he had visited their family yet. Phobo nodded, and in a faint voice he replied that he was at the dance by the bonfire last night, but nobody recognized him due to the mask he was wearing, and even if they did, he wouldn't speak to them because there's a rule about the spirits conversing with the living. Chaco told him to forget about the rules and to come with him to speak to their family. Phobo smiled and shook his head before responding that the dead don't wish for anything except for nostalgia for the land they were born and raised in. He asked Chaco if he liked Two River. Chaco nodded that he did. Phobo replied by saying that when he was alive there were good things, painful things and sad things about living in Two River. He then told Chaco that they shouldn't be conversing as he's one of the living, and in an instant Phobo vanished. As Phobo vanished, the noise of the forest came back into Chaco's ears. It was a strange feeling. It was almost as if he had entered another world when Phobo removed his mask. Chaco didn't know exactly what it was that he experienced, but he was no longer afraid of anything. Chaco made his way out of the forest and the children were amazed when he showed them the purple vial. He was the only person to complete the Trail of Courage. Back at the village, a young man noticed that Sid didn't look as cheerful as he expected him to after having a chance to scare all of the children. He patted Sid on the back while asking him what's wrong. Sid responded that he saw something strange in the forest. He took a few sips of his drink before exhaling and telling the man that he swore he saw his grandfather in the forest. Sid's grandfather died 6 years ago. His grandfather travelled a lot when he was younger, and he told Sid tales of the strange things he'd seen on his travels. Sid tried changing the subject by asking where Chaco was, but he suddenly started grinning as he blurted out, "That's it." He had thought of a new story to tell the children that was far scarier than anything he had ever told them before. And that's it for Chaco and Sid's backstory. As I mentioned at the beginning, this backstory came from a short story titled Under the Mask from the Genso Suikoden Short Story Collection 4 that released in Japan in 2002. If there are any other character short stories you want me to cover, let me know in the comments below. You can find a list of all characters who receive short stories in the pinned comment. Or if there are any other Suikoden related topics or non-Suikoden related topics that you want me to make videos on, do let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.